send me a copy of that. I was so impressed. I got your comments. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give Forrest another round of applause. I told him I was back there looking at him on the monitor, and I got so choked up I was afraid I wouldn't make it out here. So help me, I had no role in writing that. But I think he would be surprised at how many people could carry it on a quite intelligent conversation with him about playing Idi Amin and the great jazz saxophonist Charlie Parker and a White House butler. I've known White House butlers, and I've listened to virtually every recording Charlie Parker ever made. I missed old Idi Amin, but I had an idea of what a dictator was like. I thank you. I want to thank Frank Sacco, John Carlisle, Leslie Visser, unbelievable. She could make someone who wouldn't get out of bed in the morning love sports. So I thank them all. I thank you for inviting me here today. I came for two reasons. Somebody asked me before I came out here, said, I kind of thought you'd be in Davos with all those bigwigs instead of here. And I said, well, I might have gone. I miss it every 2 or 3 years. But I came here because first I believe in the mission of this hospital. And I have for a long time. When I was governor in Arkansas, I got the legislature to appropriate enough money to give us the very first tertiary care children's nursery we ever had, and we started saving kids' lives that were born weighing a pound or less, something we now sort of take for granted. But, you know, 35 years ago, it was a big deal. And Hillary started chairing the annual telethon that we used to have every year for children's hospitals. You remember that? And every state had a chair. And by the time we left, our little state had the 7th biggest children's hospital in the United States. Partly because we weren't big enough to have more than one. And I came because of my friend Joe Riley. Joe Riley, he knows I'm a sports nut, and I talk to him about baseball all the time, and he wants me never to forget every good thing Joe DiMaggio ever did. And he's favored me with a lot of the memorabilia that still comes out of the foundation. And Hillary and I were talking about it because we both had the honor of meeting Joe before he passed away in completely different circumstances. But when I was a young governor, I was defeated in 1980 for re-election. And everybody thought my career was over, everybody including me. But I had been invited. I went out of office in January of 1981. And I had been invited. It was a big year for the Republicans, 1980. That's the year President Reagan won, and we'd had the hostages in Iran, and a lot of you remember it was horrible. Its conditions. In my native state, we had the worst drought in 50 years, which is pretty tough on a state that gets 40% of its income from agriculture. And then, before they were dismantled, we had a Titan missile blow up in its silo, sending a nuclear warhead into a cow pasture. Terrifying the whole state. So God just didn't want me to win that contest. You know that great story about the guy that's walking along the edge of Grand Canyon and he slips off? He's hurtling to certain death, and he reaches out and grabs a little sprig into the side of the canyon, and he's holding on. He takes a deep breath. He thinks he's safe, and all of a sudden the roots start giving way. And he said, God, why me? I am a good person. I'm a good family person. I'm a good husband. I'm a good father. I work like crazy. I never cheat on my taxes. I give money to charity. Why me? And this thunderous voice comes out of the sky and says, son, there's just something about you I don't like. Well, anyway, that's kind of the way I felt in 1980. But I had been previously invited to come address the Democratic Convention in 81 in Florida. And then I came again in 83, and I came again in 87. So by the time I ran for president, it really wasn't a fair fight. But I met Joe Riley. And when I was running for president, he just took pictures of me every political event he could. And then when I left the White House, and whenever I came to Florida when I was president, he did. And then when I left the White House, he kept doing it. And then he went places to take pictures. I didn't have a photographer anymore. And he would never take any pay. He would never take anything. And in these over 30 years, we've been friends. He has never asked me to do a single solitary thing, not even once, except come here for his beloved hospital. So I'm also here for that. He is a good man, and he loves it. And I just want to say a few things about why these children's hospitals are so important. Pennsylvania, for years, has been the only state to do what we're now trying to do nationwide. They will publish every year the results of major procedures and care achieved by hospitals all across the state and the costs. And they find every year the same thing, that the price of a given procedure or service bears almost no relationship to what results you achieve. But the most important thing that predicts a good outcome is how many times you do it. And now that we're beginning to do this all over America, we're finding that, and it's going to have enormous ramifications over the next 10 years, both in improving the quality and helping us to hold down the rising costs of health care. That's pretty important for little kids starting out in life. That's why these children's hospitals are so important. Kids are different from grown-ups. When I got into trying to solve the problem of poor countries with huge numbers of people on AIDS who had AIDS who couldn't get medicine, and we were able to drive the price of the generic drugs down from $500 a person a year, which is not much in America, but if you live in a country with a per capita income of under $1 today, that's a lot of money and no tax base. We got the price of the adult medicine from $500 to $190 to $160 to $140, eventually to about $90. And then there was the children's medicine, which cost less to prepare, but there were so many fewer kids doing it, and the whole biochemistry of the kids was different. And they had to have nutritional supplements or they couldn't absorb the medicine and retain it long enough to get its benefits. Eventually, we got it down to $60 a year. But in this long, winding process, I learned all over again that children are different. Special efforts have to be made, but astonishing numbers of them can be saved. And I think the network of children's hospitals is really important now. I was at St. Jude's not very long ago. About a year and a half ago, the director asked me to come down because he had helped me in our struggle to sequence the human genome. You know, when I was taking elementary biology and chemistry, we all thought the gene was our smallest unit in our body, and it turns out we got 3.6 billion genomes in our body. And there was a big race to finish it. I spent $3 billion of your money to do that. Not fashionable to say that anymore, but I did. And it would have cost us a lot more if there hadn't been a big international effort to work together on it. But we finished in 2000. Last year, an independent economic analysis said that our country had received, in terms of longer lives, greater productivity, and just new biochemical companies starting up, $176 billion worth of economic benefits on that $3 billion investment in just 12 years. Going up. Now, what's the relevance of that? St. Jude has the size to do a lot of this research. So he was telling me all this, and he said, I know you're a numbers guy, but he said, I want to show you something. He took me to see a young boy who had a relatively rare but still often encountered, if you run a children's hospital, kind of brain cancer. And he said, you know, for years we've had a drug that cures this cancer, except when it doesn't, in which case it's fatal. Not only to cancer, but the drug makes it worse. He said, because we can sequence the human genome, we were able to take kids where the medicine was working and where it wasn't and see what the variance was. And then almost by an act of God, we discovered that if you cut the recommended dosage in half and give that to the 20% in the minority, they all got well too. So we went from a tragic situation, which every time they gave these kids the medicine, they were holding, crossing their fingers that it would be a survival instead of a more rapid demise, to a point where if you get people young enough now, there's virtually 100% survivability. This is a great thing. This whole thing would not have happened. And immediately, all these results were given to every children's hospital in America and any children's hospital in the world that can log on to the internet. None of this would happen if it weren't for people like you in communities all over this country building these children's hospitals where specialists who want to deal with what is unique and precious and important about our children were doing this work. And it could not be done just by public funds alone. You cannot have a policy that says we will turn no one away if they don't have a nickel to their names just on public policy alone. Now, for the states that participate in this Medicaid expansion, it'll help some. But there will always be gaps in the social fabric. And there will always be needs, because the more you can do, the more you have to do. Don't you find that in your own life? Whenever you can do something you didn't know you could do before, to make something good happen, you feel that you have to do it. That's the way all these people who work in your children's hospital feel. And so I am honored to be here tonight. I hope that my coming helps you raise a little more money. I can say that, I'm not running for anything anymore. It's supposed to be sort of unfashionable, but I'm frankly grateful that people who've enjoyed some success in their lives are willing to share some of it with less fortunate people in institutions like this. And I think it's a noble thing. I think it is a noble thing to do this. And I just want to, all of you probably know this already, but the sheer collective magnitude of good that the children's hospitals in this country do is breathtaking. In a few days, I'm going to indulge in another one of my obsessions. I'm going to the Super Bowl. And normally I wouldn't, because at my age I don't like to be that cold, and we're hosting it in New York this year. But yeah, if he throws for 400 yards again, he'll win. But anyway, I normally don't go, but I got invited because the Players Association has been a partner of our foundation on some of our health initiatives. And because they gave a prize this year of a free trip to the Super Bowl to a young football player who had overcome the biggest obstacles. And they interviewed people in all states. And the winner was a young man who struggled with repeated recurrences of childhood cancer and never gave up his dream of being a football player, and he is now a starter and a star on the football team in the little town in Arkansas where I was born. And I had nothing to do with it, but they called me and they said, you've helped us. And this young guy, and they told me the story, and I was just all choked up, and they said, so you need to come here and meet this young guy and watch the Super Bowl. And normally I hate to sit in those fancy, what do you call them, skyboxes or whatever. I like to be out in the crowd with the folks, but I'm cold. I'm going to the skybox. And I'm going to sit with that young man. But we're laughing, but I want you to be serious about this. When I think of the work that we could do at children's hospitals, if all of us took better care of ourselves and didn't impose enormous costs on the system, about 70% of our health care costs every year come from chronic diseases that are largely preventable or avoidable, in some cases reversible, because of decisions we make. And I spend lots of time on that. We have a program called the Alliance for a Healthier Generation designed to try to reverse the tide of childhood obesity. We work in 21,000 schools with over 12 million kids to try to help them be more active. I worked on trying to improve the quality of the school lunch meals. And here's another charitable good deed that almost no American knows. We made agreements with the largest soft drinks and fruit juice. They have a lot of sugar, processed fruit juice. We worked with all these folks to reach a voluntary agreement that they would together reduce the number of calories they were shipping to the schools in drinks to be served in vending machines or cafeterias. Now, when we started this, the evidence was that a staggering number of these overweight kids got half of their calories every day just from the drinks they were consuming at school. Last year, an independent body having no connection with me or the soft drink industry said that there had been a 90% reduction in the total volume of calories being shipped to schools in drinks over the last 4 years without a tax or a regulation or anything, just because we gave these folks another way to make a profit without hurting kids. There are things we can do, and I'm bringing this up to you now because, well, I'm in South Florida. Miami-Dade was the first county-wide school system to have all its schools join our alliance. And Jacksonville is one of 4 places in America where we're now trying to do the same thing for adults, for everybody in the community. We cannot keep bleeding our limited health resources dry, taking away money that the children in these children's hospitals need from completely avoidable problems that we either don't have the knowledge or discipline, or we don't think we have the money, in the case of low-income working people who hadn't had a raise in a decade and have got kids at home, to avoid. It is nuts for us to be spending 70% of our money on completely avoidable conditions. And when you think of all the miracles that have been wrought by this children's hospital, imagine what they could do if we just reduced that 70% just to 60% and redirected the money to things that are not avoidable, not preventable. So that's the only serious policy recommendation I'm going to make to you tonight. It's a personal one. Every year, about 20% of us claim about 80% of the medical expenses in America. But it's a rotating 20%. And 10 years ago, for the first time in my life, I became part of that 20% when I had to have open heart surgery, a quadruple heart bypass. And I had to have it because even when I was running 25 miles a week and thought I was fit, I was slowly eating my way to an early demise. And I won't go through all that, but the biology of it, I'm just saying it struck me when I got out of the hospital, and the American Heart Association asked me to help them. I said, okay, but I don't want to do any public service campaigns. I want us to organize a systematic effort to save children's lives. This childhood obesity problem is the #1 public health problem in America. A few years ago, the Medical Society said we had to stop calling type 2 diabetes adult onset diabetes. I read that, and then I checked, and within the last year, we had a 9-year-old girl in Harlem within a mile of my office, living within a mile of my office with type 2 diabetes, the kind you get from living, not the kind you're born with. So that's the other thing I want to say. Keep giving money to the Children's Hospital. Keep supporting them. Tell people they're working miracles. If we had everybody sharing all the impact of the latest discoveries and how they could help people in the way that the network of children's hospitals around this country share that information, we could cut the unemployment rate 2 or 3%, 10 times faster. We could figure out a lot of, these people are trying to save children's lives. So every time there's a big scientific breakthrough, it'll be blasted over the internet faster than you can blink. And believe it or not, there are now people treating children in Africa and remote countries in Asia and Latin America that never would have had access to this information before that are getting it. We need to do more of this. This is where we need to put our money. So in addition to continuing to give money to the children's hospitals, you might think of this as if you can do anything to reduce the likelihood that you or your family members will impose costs on the healthcare system that are completely avoidable. You want to look like these great former athletes do when you're their age. You ought to do that too. Because when you free that money up, you're making it possible for America's economy to grow better and for more of the miracles they bring every day at the Children's Hospital to occur. It's funny, you know, you reach a certain age in life, I mean, at least I do. My main passion in life, besides trying to live to be a grandfather, is just, I just don't want to see anybody younger than me die before their time. I had a good time in my life. And I was wildly fortunate, but I thought every day was a privilege. And to think of even one child being denied the universal gift of one more day that they should have had is something I really think about all the time now. And I think as you go older, things like that happen to you. So I thank you for doing this. I thank all of you for contributing and supporting it. I ask you to continue to contribute and support it. And remember, this is one place where bigger can be better, because there is irrefutable evidence that the more you do of anything, the better you get at it, and the more people get well. But I ask you also to help them by lightening the load that especially those of us in the baby boom generation are likely to put on our healthcare system. We don't even have to be more expensive, relatively speaking, than our parents. There are so many of us, if we just use the healthcare system and individually claim the same share of the healthcare dollar that our parents did, we're going to put a big burden on our children and their ability to raise our grandchildren and the ability of children's hospitals to be properly financed. So we need to give more and stay well. That's my simple request. Thanks again for having me and for all you do. Thank you.